from my perspective as a child, very clearly, the validity of communism really stood or fell with the same claims to validity the Catholic Church often uses. Because the charitable instinct was so strong in me, there was this tendency to judge communism against charity, against the social function of charity. Are you trying to help other people or not? And keeping it all the way real, remember, my father had real kind of rage and sorrow. My mom, too. That whole generation from the Vietnam War, specifically the Vietnam War. And, for my parents, and for a lot of people their age, their response to the Vietnam War had nothing to do with charity. It was real hatred and rage and sorrow. It was a real sense they wanted to destroy the United States. They wanted an angry fist, And I didn't see the world... I think they were wrong to see it that way also. I think they were both incorrect and morally wrong to see it that way. But you have to realize a lot of those people got involved with left-wing politics, and they didn't have any charitable motives, and it wasn't at all like the way I felt as a child, seeing images of poor and starving people on television. As a child, I never saw that in real life. But in real life, you'd see maybe homeless people on the street, see people living in poverty in different situations. The image of poverty and starvation, and then the question of what do we do from here? And, the other question, which definitely links to veganism, why doesn't anybody else care?
À-bas-le-ciel.
Hey guys, this is being recorded in very strange circumstances. I'm going to read and reply to a comment sent to me on Patreon from Theo. Theo is not just a fan or a supporter, he's really a super fan. Sometimes I quote myself and I can't find the quote, and he knows what video I'm quoting. I'm like, where's the video where I said this about this topic or something? So Theo knows my material really well, and one of the reasons for that is that he has been doing some kind of archive work, I'd say. He's been looking around a lot at what's been going on in the vegan movement, and he's been kind of piecing together links to different articles by different vegans, and different websites and different videos and so on. My best girl Melissa is sitting here just off camera next to me. She can chime in anytime. Anyway, so Theo writes, quote, I don't know the timeline of your journey into vegan activism too well. I know you've had an affinity for charity ever since you felt betrayed by parents indoctrinating you into communist ideology. Sometime around when you were studying Buddhism, doing humanitarian aid, etc., etc. So I'll read the rest of this paragraph. This is an interesting point. So he's saying that I've had an affinity for charity work, and this is somehow linked to growing up with parents who were communists and my own rejection of communism. So I had a longtime friend and frenemy called Philip, who you know some stories about, babe. And Philip grew up with Christian parents, and he felt that he was indoctrinated into a form of Christianity that he despised. And they were not, I don't know if anyone can be called a normal Christian, but they were not quite normal Christians, it has to be said. They liked going to Nigeria, not just to do charity work, but because they liked the really hardline, extreme form of Anglican and Protestant Christianity that got out there. They didn't find Christianity harsh enough, or biblical enough, or whatever you want to say. And I think probably homophobia and so on played a role in that. So that was where they felt comfortable, was as being white missionaries in that part of Africa. Anyway, but I said to Philip before, when he was complaining about his own parents, I said, possibly if we had switched families at birth, if he had been raised in my family and I would have been raised in his family, ironically, it's quite possible I would have accepted my parents' ideology just because the charity aspect meant so much to me. I think that was really almost an instinctive thing, from childhood forward for me. I can't say that was something I ever thought about. You asked me, why does charity matter to me so much? I think for many people it is. I don't know if that's for 10% of the population or 50% of the population. But the basic concept of doing the best you can, trying to help others. To give you an example, how did you feel, babe, when you were a kid and you saw someone who was mentally retarded, saw someone or interacted, saw someone on the street, not in the news? You know what I mean? When I was a child, I felt very strongly when I interacted with mentally retarded people, including people born with Down syndrome. I'm talking about severe forms of retardation, not some minor thing. I really wished I could help them. I felt this terrible yearning to want to try to help them, and the powerlessness of knowing I couldn't, and also knowing that, in terms of what your parents and teachers, you're told by your parents and teachers to keep your distance, and not without reason. You as a little kid, it is probably dangerous for you to interact with or play with mentally disabled people. So, that, for me, I think I had that out the gate. I had that out when I came out the box. I came out from day one. I don't think that was something taught to me. Now, on the other, so look, other kids also, if they had parents who were communists, would have responded to and questioned other aspects of the ideology, not just the charity aspect. But from my perspective as a child, very clearly, the validity of communism really stood or fell with the same claims to validity the Catholic Church often uses. So I remember there was a really crappy mainstream movie, The Da Vinci Code. Okay, so I saw like 5 minutes of that movie while washing dishes and changed the channel. Honestly, I'll tell you the truth. If I watched that movie, I'd have no shame. But I remember that was on TV in some circumstance like that. And in at least the movie version, the main character confronts this this representative of the Catholic Church, and he sort of says, your church is built on lies. And the representative of the Catholic Church, he's a cardinal or a deacon or something, he's some reasonably ranking person, he says back that his church washes the feet of the poor and feeds and houses the homeless, and this is their claim to legitimacy. Now, I remember I just laughed at that at the time. It was just ridiculous. I mean, when you donate money to the Catholic Church, do you want to know what percentage of it goes to feeding the poor, and what percentage of it goes to housing, clerical scholars and priests and nuns in some kind of luxury? And, I'm not hating. You just can't kid yourself. What are you paying for? Are you paying for the Pope to live in luxury? Or are you paying for the poor to live in poverty? If you wanted a charity that was devoted to helping the poor, it wouldn't look anything like the Catholic Church, right? In its design or function, what have you. But that was always striking to me. And then only when I was a teenager, but late in my teenage years, when I was in university, I read that book by Karl Popper. So the particular book by Karl Popper has a tough title. The title is The Poverty of Historicism. A bunch of his other books have catchy titles, just not that one. And there, for the first time, I saw someone openly talking about the extent to which Catholicism and communism really had things in common, in terms of their appeal. And that resonated with me too. I could see, this is a really meaningful critique of both, frankly. Anyway, something that as I've said to you recently was kind of a family secret also, was the extent to which my father was drawn to Christianity, and for maybe 10 years of his life really believed in Christianity. I always thought that was very telling, that the same people who were seduced by communist extremism, not moderate communism, are seduced by Christianity. And I don't think I ever told you this story, but I met one professor in China, and she didn't admit it to me. She admitted to my ex-wife, and then I heard from her, that she actually had a period where she had lost faith in communism, and she briefly went over to, she considered formally converting to, but she started going to church. She was being seduced by basically American-style Christianity. And she said directly, because it made the same kind of promises, it had the same kind of appeal for her. So she wasn't sleepwalking at that. It wasn't like somebody else's analysis. So there is an interesting kind of parallel there. But again, I started this by saying, in all due humility, that kind of charitable instinct, I think, was so important to me that it's quite possible, if I had been raised by Christian parents, even crazy Christian parents, even specifically my friend Philip's crazy Christian parents, that I would have found so much value in the charity side of what they were doing that I don't know. I don't know what I would have done with it. I don't know what direction I would have taken that in. But, the claims to charity on the part of communism are pretty paper thin. I've never heard anyone really try to justify, for example, the American war in Vietnam as charity. To really justify it. Why are you bombing Vietnam as charity? I've never heard someone really try to justify the American war in Afghanistan as charity, which is another parallel thing. And the communists had the same problem. The communists also invaded Afghanistan. They invaded and conquered Afghanistan. People now forget. They had their own history. So that they overlap in that specific example. And to look at any of those, but that's only one example, but to look at any of those episodes in the history of communism in Russia or in China, it's very hard to give a charitable reading to them. So that really is like a pun or a play on words, but, hey, I'm not joking around for no reason here. So it's an interesting point Theo is opening with here. So again, coming back to Theo's letter to me, he says, quote, "I know you've had an affinity for charity ever since you felt betrayed by your parents indoctrinating you into a communist ideology, and I kind of see that the other way around. Because the charitable instinct was so strong in me, there was this tendency to judge communism against charity, against the social function of charity. Are you trying to help other people or not? And keeping it all the way real, remember, my father had real kind of rage and sorrow. My mom, too. That whole generation from the Vietnam War, specifically the Vietnam War. Shout out to Tana Mongeau. Tana Mongeau's father also totally ruined by the Vietnam War. A lot of people were in that generation. And, for my parents, and for a lot of people their age, their response to the Vietnam War had nothing to do with charity. It was real hatred and rage and sorrow. It was a real sense they wanted to destroy the United States. They wanted an angry fist, And I didn't see the world... I think they were wrong to see it that way also. I mean, I think they were both incorrect and morally wrong to see it that way. But you have to realize a lot of those people got involved with left-wing politics, and they didn't have any charitable motives, and it wasn't at all like the way I felt as a child, seeing images of poor and starving people on television. I mean, as a child, I never saw that in real life. But in real life, you'd see maybe homeless people on the street, see people living in poverty in different situations. But you see, when I was a kid, babe, this may have been true for you too, there were a lot of images, especially of Ethiopia. You know, Ethiopia was the kind of sterling example of poverty, maybe for your generation, instead of Haiti. So you would have been pretty young when the earthquake in Haiti happened, or something, you know, this kind of thing. I'm just giving you examples.
Yeah, when I was in high school, my choir did a tribute concert.
Oh, yeah?
And, like, raised money, yeah.
But anyway, the image of poverty and starvation, and then the question of what do we do from here. And in my case, so my family was poor back then too. I told you, I just talked about this with my mom, and my mom was way more down to earth about it than my dad. It wasn't like I was looking at those questions from the perspective of someone born to, you know, wealth and privilege with a lot of options. It was looking at it as someone, you know, that, again, my family got more and more money as time went on after that, like while I was in university kind of period. Really while I was in university. But anyway, you know, but I was looking at it as someone who was basically, you know, poor and powerless in Canada, but poor by Canadian standards, and wondering, what can I do? What can we do? And, you know, the other question, which definitely links to veganism, why doesn't anybody else care? Why am I the only person, you know, why am I the only person moved by those things, you know? Which, obviously, a lot of children go through that, you know, one way or another. Whether it's accurate or not, whether or not the things that move you really do move a lot of people or not. So he says, sometime around when you were studying Buddhism and doing humanitarian aid, you started a Tumblr and writing articles on veganism. So, look, these things overlap. I mean, back when I was involved in Buddhism and doing the direct humanitarian work, I identified as strictly vegetarian. I didn't use the word vegan. I'd never really seen or heard the word vegan around. I remember the first time I ever heard the word vegan. That's another story I just won't tell in this video. In a sense, it's like I say all the time, I understand people not even thinking about veganism, not being motivated to be vegan, if you're actually finding the cure for cancer, or if you're actually deployed in a war zone in the army. You know, if you're doing something you're so passionate about. So back then I was strictly vegetarian. I refused to buy leather, for example. I did own leather. I would end up buying secondhand leather or something. I was trying not to buy leather. I believed that dairy and eggs were immoral, but I would eat something like a croissant that invisibly contained those things. And obviously in Cambodia, not all that often, unless you live in the croissant district of Phnom Penh, Cambodia. But anyway, you know, but actually, indeed, the fact that I was engaged with Buddhism and doing humanitarian work, that made me... It was a counterbalance to say, it's like working on the cure for cancer. You got something you're passionate about, and that's about making a positive difference in the world. And so I wasn't really thinking about veganism that much, although my own values and choices had already taken me 90% of the way towards veganism.
À-bas-le-ciel.